You are interested in the unusual, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
Yeah, speaking of conversational, it's ironic that your Skype avatar is a cat, because I'm pretty out of sorts today because we went to somebody's house when they have cats. Well, I'm allergic to cats. So my wife says, well, take some of the allergy medicine, and I did, and afterwards she could see I'm at a table supposed to be interacting with people, and I'm virtually falling asleep. She says, which one did you take? So it turns out it was drowsy.
Oh.
And the medicine makes you drowsy, so I managed to make it through without falling asleep, drank some coffee, took a nap on the drive home, and turned on the laptop, and here we are. Now I'm facing a cat.
Uh-oh. Well, if you have an allergic reaction, just let me know. And take the right medicine this time.
Yeah. The allergy reaction to a cyber cat. That's ironic.
Well, I do have a real cat beside me, also a black one, but I'm guessing that he won't transmit his catness through the internet.
Not from Canada, no.
No.
Okay, so this should be fun for you, at least, to hear the guy that's falling asleep and also caffeinated. So
right. Well, of course we've never spoken before, so I'll just think this is how you are. Anyway, you don't sound either so far.
Okay, great. All right, so yeah, I'll go right to the autobiographical information you requested. That's fine. So, I started life as a child, but you probably already knew that. So.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah.
You might have come out fully formed like Benjamin Button.
Right. Well, the thing is, I was born at a young age, so that also
it's tough,
very
isn't it?
To know, yeah.
Yeah, we never get over that.
Well, they say youth is wasted on the young, and that I definitely can appreciate. Yeah, the older I get.
Yeah, ditto.
But so, considering your interest in how our early life shapes us in many ways, I think that's a good note to begin on, because I always tend to look back upon my life prior to being in the double digits, so 9, and prior to that, of all the things I can remember, it's really difficult for me to place how old I was at any given time before that, but I have my memories from back then. So I know it was before I was 10 is when, well, in the country of my birth, we don't have the tooth fairy. We have the knockoff. We have the teeth mice.
Oh, which country is this?
That's Argentina, South America. Okay, so that's we have the knockoff, but same basic function. And I remember when I found out that there's actually no such thing as the teeth mice, like my parents had told me there is, but that actually it was my parents taking my tooth and giving me money. That made me incredibly upset.
Yeah.
And so how did I end up being a person who sort of spent a lifetime trying to uncover the truth? And I definitely always look back to that moment and realizing that's when I became a skeptic. Now, I'm referring to being a true and honest skeptic, because I find a lot of people today call themselves skeptic, but they're really cynic. And so the way I think of it, a skeptic says, I will not believe until, and the cynic says, I will not believe, period. And so I definitely look back to that time as when I suppose the veil was torn and I could see that there was a world of truth and a world of deception. And so that led me down a very long road.
Did you associate the deception then with your parents? I mean, was there an element of betrayal in the experience?
In as far as I can remember processing what had happened at that young age, it's not as if it affected my trust in my parents, But I mean, obviously, they're the ones who played the part, as well-meaning as they might have been. To me, it came across as, wait a minute, I was told that something was a fact, and now I'm told it wasn't. Right? So it had an effect in any case. And so then I know around when I was in 6th grade, my interest when I would do the old-fashioned thing, get on my bicycle, ride it down to the local library, and I would read books about witchcraft and UFOs and cryptozoology. Those were definitely my interests. And so looking back again, I can see that I was trying to get a handle on these mysteries of the world and seeking to uncover truth. And so that led me to a long road of considering various of whatever you want to call them, worldviews, philosophies, beliefs, concepts. Went through a period of the dark side, being into horror movies and horror music and everything dark and black.
That your teenage years?
Yes. Yeah. And interestingly, my dad interpreted that phase as me processing the rheumatic fever that I experienced when I was 3, and them trying to explain to me why it was that I had to stay in bed for days on end, because there was a battle going on inside my body. I mean, that makes sense to hear it explained that way now, but how do you explain that to a little child, especially a young boy who's just wanting to go romp around the house and is told, no, you have to basically stay in bed and lay there and be still because there's things going on within your body. But in any case, that was just part of the process, and it's to whatever degrees in the New Age movement. I had some interest in the reggae movement, and like I said, just anything and everything that crossed my path, I would at least be inquisitive about it and find out about it, somewhat involved in it, but never all the way. And in a way, I think that's a good thing, because my skepticism, I think, really kept me from diving headfirst into a lot of things that I now look back on saying, thank God I didn't get involved in that.
Yeah, right. So you weren't a practicing occultist then at any time?
No, I wouldn't say that. I don't think I got into anything to the point where I would consider myself having practiced it, but it was more just trying to understand what the point of view was, what the issues were, what the world view is, and just kind of running from one thing to the other, trying to take it all in. In fact, you mentioned our common interest in Aleister Crowley, at least from a researcher's point of view, and that too I found. The first book I ever picked up by Crowley, thankfully, it was the book called Confessions.
Yeah.
And I say thankfully because it is such a verbose, tedious, rambling book that I just thought to myself, okay, I'm not interested whatsoever in this. Mm. Because it is a book about everything from chess to mountaineering to occultism. I mean, he's just all over the place. And so I'm kind of thankful that was the first thing I ever read by him. And I thought, yeah, this is not appealing to me whatsoever. So I look at that as being a good thing.
Mm. There's also the first book I got on Crowley, actually. It was the Confessions, and I had it on my shelf, but I didn't read it. Perhaps that's a bad thing, because I didn't get turned off Crowley. I had that. Wow. I had that and Moonchild. I think I read Moonchild. I wasn't particularly impressed by it, but whatever. I got through it, and then it was almost as though there was some occult force that wanted me to get me into Crowley because it's the culture. We could just say it's the culture. And then I met somebody in my early 20s who was heavily into Crowley, and he kind of primed me, you could say. He was reading to me from Book of the Lies when I was half awake in the morning and doing weird things like this. So eventually I ended up quite ensconced in Crowleyana, I would say, without ever being a joiner. But I took on the archetype. I definitely took on the whole thing around Horus and the new Aeon and all of that. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just
not at all. Not at all. I mean, I'm glad you chimed in, and it reminded me that the same thing happened around that same time in my life with running across material from Robert Anton Wilson.
Yeah.
I kind of just started digging into him a little bit, and he ends up saying things such as, well, in the things I claim, some of it's true and some of it isn't, and it's for you to figure out and decipher and figure out which is which. And I just thought, I don't have time to play this guy's games.
Right.
I don't have time to devote my time to trying to figure out what part of his saying might be real and what part isn't. It doesn't appeal to me whatsoever to play this guy's games. And so that was the end of that.
So, was that related to Crowley? Because Wilson, of course, was quite an advocate of Crowley as well. So
yes, he was.
So was there a connection between those two things, with reading Wilson and becoming increasingly suspicious of Crowley?
Yes, they did come around the same time, and of course, I know your younger listeners won't really understand the world without internet, but this was the world without internet, so you had to purposefully be seeking certain things out in order to somehow manage to run across them in an obscure used bookstore here and a little dark corner of the library there, and who knows what your friend might have had on his bookshelf. And you and you end up running into these things, right? You couldn't just do a search online. You couldn't order books from Amazon. It was a different world, a very different world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, that speaks back to my last point about being kind of primed by occult forces, because, after I met, well, first of all, I was reading Robert Anton Wilson at the time. Castaneda was my gateway. I was reading Castaneda that blew my mind figuratively and made me realize that, wait, the occult's real. It's not just Hollywood stuff. So then I went to Crowley. I bought Crowley, but I didn't really get into Crowley. But I did also discover Robert Anton Wilson, who of course writes about Crowley. So that would have helped prime me more to Crowley, because I was into Robert Anton Wilson. I didn't mind that maybe logic thing that you reacted to. And then I met this person who he even sort of subtly insinuated that he was the reincarnation of Crowley, or at least I began to believe that. So that was pretty deep headfuckery going on there. And then what happened was that I ended up living in Tangier in Morocco. I disinherited my fortune and had gone off to live on the streets as part of a sort of spiritual quest combined with survival mechanism reaction to heartbreak. And while I was in Tangier, I had no books I'd only taken a handful of books, and one of them was Crowley, Portable Darkness, so I read that quite a few times. And the Book of the Law was another. So I was already really immersing myself in this very sparse, Spartan time. Crowley was one of the only sort of elements I had culturally to take refuge in. And then it got much weirder. There was a tiny library with English books, and so I went there, when I ran out of books, hoping to find something, knowing that it was against all odds that I'd find anything of any interest, because it was so small, so, mostly just the equivalent of Tom Clancy or John Grisham novels back then in 1992. And I found on the bookshelf an old copy of Crowley's Book of Tot, which is the last book he wrote, so it's one of the deepest. And I stole it immediately, but I didn't consider that I was stealing it. I was convinced, the mindset I was in, that it had somehow been magically put there for me, because it just seemed so improbable that I would find it. So not only did I take it and devour it, and I read it a dozen times or something, but it reinforced somehow my belief that I was destined to continue the tradition that Crowley was trying to, the whole thing, the Lamech mission, that I was somehow part of it. And because it was the only book that I read during that period, I became it's all about the tarot, his tarot deck. So I became determined to get hold of the tarot deck, and eventually I managed to get hold of the book of, his tarot deck, and I learned the tarot, and the first money I ever made was on the streets of Spain, reading Crowley's tarot. So incredible, looking back, how circumstances conspired for me to become so invested in the Crowley narrative. It really was like destiny, manifest destiny, and yet, like yourself, I'm at the point, I can't say what you said, which is, I'm glad I didn't go deeper into it. I could just say, oh shit, I wish someone had been there to warn me, but on the other hand, somehow that was my path, and at least now I can speak, from a sort of very deep experience of it, and to a certain degree I feel that adds validity to my, my criticism, let's say, put it mildly, of Crowley, that there was a period where I really did take it on board completely, and I can see thereby the ill effects of that through my own experience, like on my body. I literally bear the marks on my body from that.
And I know that now that I'm reading your Prisoner of Infinity, I know you could say virtually the same word-by-word statement about Strieber.
Yeah.
Now, you said your friend claimed to be the reincarnation of Crowley.
Well, he didn't claim it, but somehow I ended up believing that. I wouldn't even say.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't even say he led me to believe it, but I think that's possible. A bit of NLP here and there.
Gotcha.
For example, he said that Crowley repented in his final days, and I believed it. Maybe true even, but there's certainly no way he would have known that, because there's nothing on record suggesting that. So to me, it indicated that he had some inside astral knowledge of it, and that made me think,
because I know Timothy Leary claimed as much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wonder how many people are the reincarnation of Crowley?
Yeah, no doubt. Well, of course, figuratively, there's some truth in it, isn't there? I mean, what Leary was referring to, he was sort of pursuing the same agendas, pushing the same agendas, carrying the same cultural virus.
Right.
Maybe even had the same, assignation as an operative as Crowley.
I found it interesting you mentioned this was around 92, because that's the same exact period of time I've been referring to as the early 90s. And I did read some Castaneda, and that is when I got interested in, I did read Strieber back then as well. So all these were apparently in my and your circles in the early 90s.
Right. Yeah.
I did notice, incidentally, that if you look at the very specific shape of the cross on the back of Crowley's tarot deck, it is the same cross that is used by the Rosicrucians, and the same cross that became to be a symbol for Scientology. It's a very particular shape. And, Scientology, they used to use the two interlocking right side up triangles, and they decided to forgo that and replace it with this cross. So I don't know. I think you and I are aware of L. Ron Hubbard's interest in Thelema in his time with Jack Parsons, but he is using the same, whoever decided to make that change, I think they knew exactly what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it seems as though there's a common agenda, a common program, to say. However much it's difficult, isn't it, when one is entering into these realms of psychic phenomena, the occult. It becomes difficult, if not impossible, to separate out what's, say, genuine psychic phenomena, as in the zeitgeist, as in the collective unconscious, which is manifesting or responding to the same symbols in this case, and social engineering, which is, in a sense, nothing to do with psychism. It's just cynically manipulated, cynical manipulation of media and of images and whatnot. But it can bring about psychic phenomena, I think. I don't know where you stand on that. It's a bit of a grey area.
There's a point where one has to think about it this way. Let's say I throw all that stuff away. I don't believe it. But the fact is that they do. So then you wonder, how does that interact with reality? So I'll give you an example. If you think about the space opera, as it's called, the mythology of Dianetics and Scientology as an example. When you look at the book cover for the Dianetics book, what is it? Do you recall off the top of your head, the Dianetics book?
I don't. It was so many versions as well. Is it consistent throughout the editions?
I believe the Dianetics one is, and it is a volcano. Okay, now, if you just look at it, it looks like it's an erupting volcano, but it's not actually erupting. It's being bombed. Okay, so the mythos of L. Ron Hubbard is about the intergalactic warlord Xenu, who deals with overpopulation by packing up these alien entities into boxes, dumping them here on Earth inside of volcanoes, and then bombing the volcanoes. Okay, and so his view is that these alien entities then just kind of suffered such a trauma that they roamed around the earth essentially as spirits. They're called thetans. And that's why we have these psychological problems, because basically we're essentially possessed by these alien entities. And that's all that to say, that is the point of the book cover, is so that when you look at it, it'll trigger some kind of ancient memory of you, of these alters that are living within you who suffered that trauma of being inside a volcano and being bombed. So you see that in many Scientology books. I mean, some are very obscure for me to understand, but some are obvious. I mean, I have a Scientology book that the cover is literally nothing but a bomb that's falling. I mean, think about that in a self-help book. It's literally a dropping bomb on the cover. And that's what it is they're attempting to trigger something in you. And that's why they display the images that they do. So now when you think about that, and you think about pop culture, any level, books, TV, movies, why are certain images being displayed to us? And it's because people who believe that they're able to trigger us subconsciously or subliminally, or however you want to look at it, it's what they're doing. That's what they're doing.
So when you discovered Strieber, do you feel that the image on the cover of Communion triggered you?
No, I wouldn't say that. And actually, that is something I wanted to ask you about, because, okay, so let's clean up a little bit of a mess. So Strieber is definitely the poster boy for the alien abduction phenomena, wouldn't you say?
I would, even though he would reject that, of course.
Exactly, and that's exactly what I was going to say. That's one of the oddities, is he has been the poster boy for decades, and yet he would not necessarily call them aliens, although every now and then he does. And then he does end up referring to them as grays.
Yeah, he does.
Obviously.
Over time,
but now,
he did, yeah.
So why is that basically his alien goddess lover, the nun and all that? Why is the visitor on the cover of Communion, which is an image that Whitley Strieber himself commissioned, why is that not gray?
Yeah.
I'm seriously asking if you have any idea why that is.
No, and I think the mystery there isn't so much that he talks about greys, but the image on the cover isn't grey, but that he never addresses that. That's the real mystery, because, well, I mean, it would be easy to clear up, I think. He could just, I came up with a theory about that back in the days when I was more literally believing in aliens, which was that they exist on a spectrum of degeneration. The greys are the really degenerated one that are coming from the further future, and the whites are the ones that are coming, whatever. I came up with a theory.
Gotcha.
So he could have done too, but he's never addressed it. He's never addressed that. It's as if we're not supposed to think about it. So I don't know why, but I don't know why. I don't see anything inherently sinister in that, except that it's a kind of thought stopper. Like, somehow we're not supposed to ask rational questions about Whitley's narrative, which is certainly what I discovered with Prisoner of Infinity, the more you ask rational questions about it, the more quickly it will come unraveled.
Yes, as I've been being made very aware in reading your Prisoner of Infinity book. Indeed, yeah, I know what you mean.
But they're not obvious, as in, I mean, because obviously the whole premise seems irrational, but that doesn't count because he's talking about some other reality intersecting with our reality. He's never claiming they're extraterrestrials, and even if you were that, whatever, that would be a similar thing. Like there's nothing inherently irrational about extraterrestrials, right? So his whole narrative is a paradigm buster, but I think that's supposed to stop our thinking so that we won't notice that there are internal contradictions within the stuff he's telling, as in he was in Texas, no, he was in Austin, no, he was in London, whatever, there's actually just, because a similar thing came out about Castaneda over the years, although I don't know if it was to the same degree, certainly not in the same way. In fact, I think I'm practically the only person who's really pointing it out about Strieber, whereas Castaneda was a systematic sort of debunking around his work around a similar thing, that the dates didn't add up and the places and the names and so on and so forth. But I think with Strieber it's, well, I mean, it could be the case with Castaneda too, but with Strieber what I've ended up having to deduce from it, and quite early on essentially I did, was that he himself is fragmented, so he himself may not notice the inconsistencies, and that could even extend to as massive as an inconsistency as calling a creature grey that is obviously tan brown on the cover of his book. I don't know. I mean, it seems impossible, doesn't it? But he's never mentioned it as far as I know, never once.
Well, and that's one of the issues when thinking of Strieber in a neat little box of alien abduction phenomena is in Strieber, you're basically looking at a one-man Montauk project. Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit. Montauk project basically being virtually every wild conspiracy theory you could ever imagine, and some you could not imagine, packed into one. I mean, it's got everything, right? So
yeah.
In that way, Strieber isn't just about alien abduction or contact with visitors, but one day he decides, oh, hey, I was reincarnated many times. The next day he decides, I'm a time traveler. The next time he decides, I played a influential role in ancient Rome and in Atlantis, and I traveled to Mars. And I mean, next thing you know, the guy's basically making every claim anybody could ever make. And you're right. So how do you maintain that consistency? It's almost like he's created a reality for himself where what's the point of being consistent? Because by demanding consistency, you're demanding a certain view of reality, and it's one that I don't see he any longer holds.
Right.
Although it is very convenient for him, and then I'm not able to claim whether he's being purposefully deceptive or not, but let me give you an example of what I call his reverse predictions. Okay, so when the supposed face on Mars was revealed to him, by golly, all of a sudden he remembers that actually he had seen that many, many, many years ago when he essentially had an out-of-body experience and he traveled over the surface of Mars. So there you have Strieber being shown something, and after that, then he places himself as somebody who was aware of it before.
Mm-hmm. So when you say when he was shown the face on Mars, you're referring to the incident he describes with John Gleedman, I think it was, and the Interplanetary Society, whatever that was, that he later claimed triggered his abduction memories?
Right. The memory he had of this, I guess this off-world portion of his schooling where Okay, you remember that scenario where he claims he literally somehow managed to find himself floating over the surface of Mars.
To astral project to Mars, yeah, in the secret school, yeah. But here's we're living an example now of the complexity of trying to unpack Strieber, because what I was trying to ascertain was which occasion when Strieber claimed to have seen the face on Mars we're talking about, because when he first wrote Communion, he said that he didn't know anything about UFOs, he had no interest in any of that stuff when these memories started surfacing. But by the time of Secret School, I guess it was in Secret School, he recounts the incident in 1985 where he was part of this interplanetary society, he was donating money to it, and he was shown as, a classified picture of the face on Mars. So this was before Richard Hoagland and all that, before it became part of the folklore, and that triggered the resurfacing memories, not of the Secret School, because that came later, but the initial 1985 abduction event in his cabin in New York, right? So yeah, I'm confused even trying to ascertain which part you're referring to and how aware you are of the contradictions in Strieber, because there's a whole hatful there.
Exactly, and it's one of the kind of things that would make me wonder how much time do I want to invest in trying to understand a man who, I feel terrible for him, because he has obviously been the victim of something, and I know that if we take him at face value, he has spent a good portion of his lifetime trying to figure out what that was. And if we talk about how he doesn't claim they're aliens, he claims they're visitors, but then every now and then he will use the word alien, but then again, what does that mean? And he has claimed that they're actually, down through time, he's attempted to decipher who and what they are, and so he has basically claimed that they are everything and anything, from demons to visitors from other, I don't know what you'd call them, dimensions, universes. You name it, he has at least floated the idea.
To our higher selves also.
Yeah, and in fact, it's almost like the poor guy is trying to be the Forrest Gump, of reality, placing himself in the middle of every phenomena, right? So, for instance, the great teacher who reveals to him the key, right? Even speculates that, Strieber thinks maybe that is actually Strieber himself visiting himself from a future time or another higher realm. So even it's like the teacher becomes the master, right? The student becomes the master, who then teaches the student to